Hi, I'm George, 65 years old, retired Army veteran. I spent 4 decades of my life serving this country, battling enemies in foreign lands. But I never imagined I'd be fighting the most brutal battle of my life right in my own home. 3 years ago, I married Nancy. After losing my first wife to illness, I thought I'd never find happiness again. But Nancy came into my life like a ray of sunshine, making me believe in second chances. She was vibrant, 20 years younger than me, full of life and energy that made me feel like there was still something to look forward to each day. I'm not ashamed to say that I fell for her hard and fast. We were married within a year of meeting, and I thought I'd struck gold. But a few months ago, everything started to feel different. Subtle changes at first, the kind that whisper in your ear that something's wrong but are never loud enough to make you act. Nancy's behavior became strange, almost guarded. The woman who used to greet me with warmth and affection now seemed distant, her smile no longer reaching her eyes. She was always on her phone, texting someone with that look of intensity one hadn't seen before. When I asked her about it, she'd brush me off, saying it was just her sister or some work colleague. But it didn't stop there. Nancy started dressing up more, not for our dinners or evenings out, but for errands and meetings that seemed to pop up more frequently. Her trips to the grocery store would stretch into hours. Her excuses grew flimsier, and sometimes she'd return without any groceries at all, mumbling something about not finding what she was looking for. I wanted to confront her, to ask what the hell was going on, but every time I opened my mouth to do it, I'd stop. I'd remind myself that I was just being paranoid, that she had her own life and needed space. The breaking point came one fateful afternoon last month. I had a doctor's appointment that morning and left the house as usual. But halfway there, I realized I'd forgotten my wallet and decided to turn back. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Nancy's car still parked in the garage. I thought it was strange, since she'd told me she had a lunch meeting downtown. Curious and a little worried, I quietly opened the front door and stepped inside. That's when I heard it. Her voice, low and hushed, coming from the kitchen. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Okay, maybe I was, but something told me to stay quiet. To listen. Don't worry, he has no idea, she murmured into her phone, a smile evident in her tone. Yeah, we're almost there. No, he's completely clueless. Still living in La La Land, thinking we're this perfect couple. My stomach twisted into knots. Who the hell was she talking about? I leaned against the wall, straining to hear more. Once the papers are signed, everything will fall into place. He'll be out of the picture, and we can finally move forward. My blood ran cold. Was she talking about me? What papers? Out of the picture? My mind raced as I tried to piece together what I was hearing. But before I could process it, Nancy laughed, a light, carefree sound that made my skin crawl. Okay, I'll see you later, Todd. Love you too. Love you? My entire world seemed to tilt off its axis. I took a step back, almost stumbling into the living room. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was telling another man she loved him, right in our home, no less. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct screamed at me to barge into that kitchen, to demand answers. But something held me back. I needed proof. Evidence. If this was what I thought it was, I couldn't afford to confront her without knowing the full extent of her betrayal. So, I turned and slipped back out the front door, got into my car, and drove around aimlessly, trying to calm down. That night, I didn't sleep. The images of her talking to that man, Todd, whoever the hell he was, haunted me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind running through 1,000 scenarios. Had this been going on for weeks? Months? Had she ever loved me at all? The questions were a torment, and I knew there was only one way to get answers. The next morning, I made a call to an old friend, Jake. Jake and I went way back, served together in the Middle East, faced death more times than I can count. After he retired, he started a private investigation business. If anyone could get to the bottom of this mess, it was Jake. George, what's going on? He asked, his voice lined with concern. I need your help, Jake, I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat. I think Nancy's cheating on me. But it's more than that. I think she's planning something. I need to know what. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Jake's voice came back, calm and steady. I'm on it. Just sit tight and don't do anything rash. We'll figure this out. And that's how it began. A week later, Jake called me with news that would shatter whatever illusion I had left. He'd followed Nancy, tracked her movements, and found out things I'd never have imagined. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown conspiracy, and I was the mark. But that's just the beginning. Because what I discovered next made my blood run cold and set the stage for the kind of showdown that no one saw coming. When Jake called me back that following week, his voice was tense, almost hesitant. I knew right away that whatever he had found wasn't going to be good. Sitting alone in my empty kitchen, I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "George, I'm sending you some files," he said, his tone low. "Photos, documents, you name it. But you need to be ready for this, man. It's worse than we thought." Worse than I thought? My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. What could possibly be worse than hearing my wife profess her love to another man? I clicked on the email Jake had sent me and opened the first attachment. It was a series of photographs. The first one showed Nancy in a parking lot, a place I didn't recognize. The timestamp read 11:45 a.m. on a Wednesday. That was the day she told me she was at a business lunch. I flipped to the next photo, my stomach twisting tighter with each click. There she was, leaning against a shiny black sedan. A man stood beside her, grinning like he'd won the lottery. He was a wiry, sleazy-looking guy, with greasy hair slicked back and a face that screamed trouble. His hand rested on Nancy's lower back, fingers splayed possessively. The next photo hit me like a punch to the gut. The man leaned down, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that looked far too practiced, too familiar. Nancy's hands wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer. I could practically see the smile on her face, the kind of smile she hadn't given me in months, or maybe even years. I kept flipping through the photos, each one a dagger to my heart. There were more, Nancy and the man at a restaurant, sitting across from each other, her hand resting lightly on his. Nancy shopping with him at a high-end clothing store, trying on outfits I'd never seen her wear. But it was the final image that made my blood run cold. Nancy and the man standing in front of a small house in a suburban neighborhood 2 towns over. The man held a set of keys in his hand, dangling them teasingly in front of Nancy. She laughed, a look of pure joy lighting up her face. The same face that looked dead and empty whenever she was with me. I felt like I was watching a movie, a horrible, twisted movie that I couldn't escape from. My hands shook as I opened the second attachment Jake had sent. This time, it was a document. A deed to a property listed under the name Nancy Turner. My heart stopped. Nancy Turner? That wasn't my wife's name. She was Nancy Andrews. But there, on the document, was her signature, neat, precise, and unmistakable. "Jake, what the hell is this?" I whispered into the phone, my voice barely more than a croak. "She's using an alias, George," Jake said softly. "She's been living a double life. The guy in the photos, his name's Todd Miller. They've been together for at least 2 years. And that house? It's in both their names. She's got a whole setup with him over there." I closed my eyes, trying to process what he was saying. A double life? Another house? The implications were dizzying. But Jake wasn't finished. "There's more," he continued. "They've been funneling money into joint investments. Real estate, businesses, she's using your funds to build a separate life with this guy. And I don't mean small-time stuff. We're talking hundreds of thousands here." I sat there, numb, staring blankly at the screen. Hundreds of thousands of my money. Money I'd spent years saving, building, protecting. And she was using it to play house with some dirtbag I'd never even heard of. How is this even possible? I stammered, my mind spinning. "She's smart, George. Really smart. All the accounts she's been using are under Nancy Turner. Separate from your joint accounts. It's why you never noticed the withdrawals. She's been transferring the money from the joint account into a separate one and then using that to finance everything." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "So, what do I do now? How do I stop this?" Jake hesitated. "You need more evidence, man. Right now, you've got proof of an affair, but if you want to nail her for the money, you'll need to catch her in the act. We need to see her make those transactions, hear her talk about her plans. That's the only way to shut her down for good. I wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. But instead, I forced myself to calm down. All right, I said finally. What's the plan? The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. I took Jake's advice and installed a hidden camera in Nancy's office at home. A small device, no bigger than a thumbtack, positioned perfectly to capture her computer screen and any phone calls she made while sitting at her desk. I also had Jake place a tracker on her car. We needed to know exactly where she was going and when. I felt like a damn stalker, but what choice did I have? Nancy had been one step ahead of me for too long. It was time I leveled the playing field. The first breakthrough came 3 days later. I sat at my computer, watching the live feed from Nancy's office. She was typing furiously, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Hey, it's me," she said, glancing around as if she could sense she was being watched. "Yeah, I just transferred another 50 grand into the investment account. That puts us at, what? Almost $500,000? Not bad for a rainy day fund." My blood boiled as I listened. $50,000, gone in the blink of an eye. My money, being funneled into some secret account I had no access to. But it wasn't just the money that stung. It was the ease with which she did it, like she'd done it 100 times before. "And Todd," she continued, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "He's still clueless. I could drain his accounts dry, and he'd probably thank me for it. But don't worry, baby. Once this is all over, it's just you and me. I promise." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. She was talking to someone else. Another man. Not Todd. Who the hell was she really loyal to? How many layers did this betrayal have? I ended the call and sat there in stunned silence. Nancy wasn't just living a double life. She was playing a twisted game, one where I was nothing more than a pawn. But she'd underestimated me. I wasn't about to sit back and let her destroy everything I'd worked for. This was war. And if she thought she could beat me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. That single recording had lit a fire inside me. My body buzzed with adrenaline, every muscle taut and ready for action. The Nancy I'd thought I knew, the sweet, caring woman who promised to stand by me until death, had been a carefully crafted illusion. The real Nancy was a cunning strategist, playing everyone like chess pieces. I'd spent my whole life strategizing in war zones, and now, it was time to bring that experience home. But I couldn't rush this. One wrong move, and she'd slip through my fingers. So, I spent the next few days analyzing every piece of information Jake gathered. From where she shopped to where she spent her weekends, each detail was a breadcrumb, leading me deeper into her web of lies. On Friday, Jake sent me something that made my blood run cold. "George, we've got another player," he said over the phone, his voice strained. "What do you mean?" I asked, bracing myself. "There's a third person involved. Someone named Vinny," he said, pausing for a moment as if deciding whether or not to continue. "I've got photos of them meeting. Nancy, Todd, and this Vinny guy. And they weren't talking about you or Todd's relationship. They were talking about money. Big money." I pulled up the photos Jake sent, a series of images taken from a distance, clearly from a high-powered lens. There they were, Nancy, Todd, and a muscular man with a shaven head and a face scarred by what looked like years of street fights. They were sitting in a booth at some dingy diner on the outskirts of town, papers spread out in front of them. "She's using your money to invest in properties and businesses through Vinny," Jake explained, voice tight. "And it's not just regular investments. We're talking about laundering operations. From what I can see, she's trying to pull the money out clean and legitimize it before anything happens." My throat tightened. Laundering operations? This wasn't just some petty scam or a love affair gone wrong. This was organized crime. I'd suspected Nancy was scheming behind my back, but I never thought she'd stoop so low, or be so reckless. "What's her endgame?" I muttered, staring at the pictures like they'd reveal the answer. "Why go through all this trouble?" "Simple," Jake replied. "If she launders the money and then dumps Todd, she can leave clean. She'll be rich, and nobody will be able to trace it back to her." "And me?" I asked bitterly. Where do I fit into all of this? She's counting on you to die, George, Jake said bluntly. One way or another, she wants you out of the picture. She'll either bleed you dry until you're too broke to fight back, or, she's got something else planned. The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around my neck. Nancy wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to erase me. Tell me about Vinny, I growled, forcing the rage down. What's his angle? Vinny's a known fixer, Jake explained. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. Extortion, blackmail, even assault charges. He's been charged but never convicted. If he's involved, then Nancy's playing with fire. I stared at the photos, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated, calculated murder by another means. I'd been letting her slither around in the shadows for too long, thinking she was just a gold digger looking for a payout. But this was on a whole different level. All right, I said, steeling myself. We need to bring this to the police. Not yet, Jake interrupted sharply. We don't have enough to nail her. If we go to the cops now, she'll lawyer up and claim ignorance. You know how these things work. We need something concrete, something that proves she's not just complicit, but actively involved. I took a deep breath, the reality of the situation pressing down on me like a weight. If I wanted to end this, I had to go all the way. No half measures. No hesitation. What do you suggest? We're going to get her on tape making a deal, Jake said. I'm going to wire Todd. He's already shown signs of doubt, he's not as deep into this as Vinny is. If we can get Nancy talking to him, convincing him to launder the money or handle something illegal, we'll have everything we need. I hesitated. And what about Todd? Is he going to turn on her? Jake's voice softened. He's scared, George. She's been manipulating him just like she's been manipulating you. If we offer him a way out, a way to avoid going down with her, he'll take it. I nodded slowly, the gears turning in my mind. Nancy had set this elaborate trap, thinking I was too blind or too stupid to see through it. But now, the tables were turning. If she wanted to play dirty, then I'd show her just how dangerous it could be. The setup, a deadly game of cat and mouse. The next step was delicate. We had to approach Todd without tipping off Nancy or Vinny. So, Jake set up a chance meeting at a local bar where Todd liked to hang out after work. I watched from a distance as Jake slid into the seat next to him, ordered a drink, and struck up a casual conversation. Todd looked nervous, eyes darting around the room, fingers twitching against his glass. Jake played it cool, leaning in just enough to make Todd listen. I know what she's doing, Jake murmured, voice low enough that only Todd could hear. She's using you, man. And she's setting you up to take the fall. Todd stiffened, his face paling. What the hell are you talking about? Jake slowly placed a folder on the bar, nudging it toward Todd. This is what she's been doing with your money. I've got bank records, transfers, even conversations she's had with Vinny about how you're a liability. Todd's hands shook as he opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. No, no way. She wouldn't. She told me. She told you she loved you, right? Jake cut in sharply. That she was going to leave her husband and you two would live happily ever after? Look, I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying this because you need to wake up. She's planning to take the money and run, and when everything goes south, guess who she's going to throw under the bus? Todd's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. I don't believe you. You don't have to, Jake replied smoothly. But if you want to protect yourself, we need your help. Record her. Get her talking. Get her to admit what she's planning. If you do that, we can take her down, and you can walk away clean. For a long moment, Todd sat there, staring at the folder like it was a bomb about to explode. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, he whispered. I'll do it. Laying the trap. The days that followed were excruciating. Every moment felt like a lifetime as I waited, watching and listening from afar as Todd and Nancy went through their sick little dance. He'd wear the wire Jake provided, subtly steering the conversation toward money, plans, and the future. And Nancy, confident and arrogant as ever, took the bait. Piece by piece, she started to reveal her true intentions. Each admission was like a stab to the heart, but I forced myself to stay strong. This was the only way to bring her down for good. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Todd got her to say the words we'd been waiting for. The words that would seal her fate. "I don't care what happens to George," she hissed into the wire, her voice dripping with venom. "If he dies, he dies. Either way, I'm getting what's mine." My hands clenched into fists as the recording played in my ears. That was it. The final nail in her coffin. Now, it was time to spring the trap and watch as her world crumbled around her. It's strange how betrayal can turn someone you thought you knew into a complete stranger. When I heard Nancy's voice on that recording, talking so casually about my death, something inside me shifted. It was like a switch flipped, the love, the trust, the hurt, all of it evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated focus. This was no longer about a broken marriage or a cheating spouse. This was war, and I intended to win. Jake and I reviewed every piece of evidence, fine-tuning our approach. The recordings, the financial documents, the surveillance footage of her meetings with Todd and Vinny, we had everything we needed to bring her down. But we needed to execute this perfectly. If she sensed we were onto her, if she realized how deep we'd dug, she'd bolt, and with her connections, she could disappear before we had a chance to react. I wanted to confront her, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her squirm, but Jake urged caution. "We need to be smart about this, George," he warned. "She's a cornered animal right now. Push her too hard, and she'll do something reckless. Something dangerous. Dangerous." That word hung in the air between us, a reminder of just how far Nancy was willing to go. She wasn't just some petty criminal or cheating spouse. She was willing to have me killed. And for what? A few $100,000 and the freedom to live with Todd? No, I realized. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. Nancy thrived on being in control, on manipulating everyone around her. And I was about to shatter that illusion completely. We decided to set up one final meeting, a trap that would force her hand. If she took the bait, she'd have no choice but to reveal her true colors. And when she did, the consequences would be irreversible. Setting the stage. Todd was our key. After agreeing to help us, he'd become even more skittish around Nancy. I worried she'd notice the change in him, but she was so confident in her control over him that she didn't seem to care. He was nothing more than a pawn to her, a disposable piece in her grand scheme. I instructed Todd to call Nancy and arrange a private meeting at the house, the one I'd bought under the pretense of helping her sister. It was the perfect place for the confrontation, secluded, away from prying eyes, and already wired with cameras and microphones thanks to Jake's meticulous preparation. When the day came, I arrived at the house early, setting up in the small office that looked out onto the living room where the meeting would take place. Jake sat beside me, monitoring the audio and video feeds. Every nerve in my body was on edge, the anticipation crackling like electricity in the air. Todd arrived first, glancing around nervously as he stepped inside. He looked terrible, pale, gaunt, like he hadn't slept in days. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He'd been complicit in all of this, after all, but he was also a victim, just like me. "Don't worry," I told him quietly through the earpiece Jake had given him. "You're doing the right thing. Just stick to the plan." He nodded slightly, rubbing his sweaty palms against his jeans. Then he took a deep breath and moved into the living room, sitting down on the edge of the couch like he was ready to bolt at any second. Minutes later, Nancy's car pulled up in the driveway. My heart pounded as I watched her get out, her expression carefully neutral. She wore a fitted black dress and high heels, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the sophisticated, confident woman I'd once fallen for. But now, all I saw was a predator, and I was about to cut her down to size. She stepped inside, glancing around with a faint frown. "Todd? What's going on? Why'd you want to meet here?" Todd stood up, shifting nervously. I just needed to talk to you, Nancy. About everything. About us." She sighed, exasperation flashing across her face. "Oh, for God's sake, Todd. Is this another one of your crises? You know we can't afford to have you losing your nerve now." "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "It's not that. It's just. I need to know, Nancy. I need to know if you're serious about this. About me. About us being together." She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "What is this, Todd? A damn therapy session? You know I'm serious. We're so close to having everything we want. All you have to do is stick to the plan. Yeah, but, Todd hesitated, glancing around as if he could feel my eyes on him through the camera lens. What if something happens to George? What if he doesn't sign the papers? Or worse, what if he finds out? Nancy's gaze sharpened, her lips thinning into a tight line. What are you talking about? George is clueless. He won't find out. And even if he does, it won't matter. He's too proud, too stubborn to admit that his little wifey's been screwing him over this whole time. My fists clenched as I listened. The way she spoke about me, like I was some pathetic old fool who didn't deserve an ounce of respect. But I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I needed. This was the proof. Besides, she continued with a smirk, if it comes to it, we'll make sure he's out of the way. Permanently. Todd swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. You mean, you want to? Nancy shrugged, waving a hand dismissively. Why not? It's not like anyone's going to miss him. We'll make it look like an accident, some tragic fall or a heart attack. Trust me, Todd, I've got it all planned out. I felt a surge of satisfaction as I glanced over at Jake. He gave me a grim nod, his finger hovering over the record button. We had her. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. All we had to do now was let her keep talking, let her dig her own grave. You're crazy, Todd murmured, his voice barely audible. Crazy? Nancy laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. No, Todd. I'm smart. Smarter than George. Smarter than you. And once this is all over, we'll be living the good life. Just you and me. Isn't that what you wanted? Todd shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. I don't know. This is too much, Nancy. Maybe we should just take the money and run. She shook her head, stepping closer and placing a hand on his chest. No, Todd. We're not running. We're taking what's ours. What's mine. And if George has to die for that to happen, then so be it. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to storm into that room and rip her to shreds. But I stayed put, my eyes locked on the screen as she smiled, her hand resting on Todd's chest like a viper coiled to strike. Now, are you with me or not? She asked softly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Todd looked up, meeting her gaze. Then, slowly, he nodded. I'm with you, he whispered. Good, she purred, her smile widening. Because tonight, we're going to put this whole mess to bed once and for all. Jake and I exchanged a glance. This was it. The moment of truth. Let's wrap this up, Jake said quietly. It's time to call in the cavalry. An hour later, the house was surrounded by law enforcement. Nancy had no idea what was coming as she sat there, sipping the wine Todd had nervously poured her. She thought she was in control, thought she was about to set her plans in motion. But when the police burst through the door, guns drawn and badges flashing, the look of shock on her face was priceless. She jumped to her feet, dropping her glass as officers swarmed the room, shouting orders. What is this? She shrieked, her eyes wide with panic. What the hell is going on? Ma'am, you're under arrest, one of the officers said curtly, stepping forward with a pair of handcuffs. For conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and money laundering. Nancy stumbled back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Murder? This is insane. I didn't do anything. This is all a mistake. I stepped into the room then, my heart pounding as I looked her dead in the eyes. No mistake, Nancy, I said quietly. It's over. I know everything. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she looked like she was going to faint. Then her expression twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You bastard, she screamed, lunging at me. You set me up. You can't do this to me. But it was already too late. The police dragged her back, forcing her wrists into the cuffs as she thrashed and screamed, her voice echoing through the house like the howls of a wounded animal. You'll regret this, George, she shrieked as they led her away. I'll ruin you. But her words were cut off as the door slammed shut behind her. And just like that, it was over. I stood there in the silence that followed, my heart still racing. Jake appeared beside me, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, man," he said softly. "It's finally over." I nodded slowly, a strange sense of calm settling over me. It wasn't exactly victory. I hadn't won back what I'd lost. But I'd survived. I'd come out on top. And Nancy? She was finished. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Thanks, Jake," I murmured. "I couldn't have done this without you." He shrugged. "You're tougher than you think, George. You were never going to let her win." I smiled faintly, glancing toward the door where Nancy had disappeared. No. I guess I wasn't. With one last look at the house, I turned and walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. Because for the first time in a long time, I was free. For the first time in months, I felt a semblance of peace. The officers had taken Nancy away, her furious shouts fading into the night. But even as I stood there, feeling that temporary relief wash over me, I knew this wasn't truly the end. If I'd learned anything about Nancy in these last few weeks, it was that she wouldn't go down without a fight. Jake stayed behind as I watched the blue and red lights flash outside. I'd expected him to congratulate me again, to offer some words of reassurance. But instead, he looked tense, his eyes darting to the side as if considering whether or not to tell me something. "What is it?" I asked, feeling the calm start to erode under the weight of his silence. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "George, I need you to understand something. Nancy's in custody now, but that doesn't mean she's powerless. Women like her, they have layers. Contingency plans. And Vinny? He's not going to just walk away from this." I frowned, glancing back at the house as if I could still see her standing there, wearing that infuriating smirk. "What do you mean?" "The police have the recordings. They've got all the evidence we gathered. What else can she do?" Jake shook his head. "It's not about what she can do. It's about who she knows. Vinny's not the type to take this kind of heat and let it slide. He's going to come after you, George. Either to scare you into dropping the charges, or worse." A cold chill settled over me. I hadn't even considered Vinny's reaction. With Nancy out of the picture, his entire operation could be exposed. And guys like him? They didn't back down. They'd do whatever it took to protect themselves. "So, what do we do?" I asked quietly, feeling that familiar tension creep back into my shoulders. Jake leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You need to lay low for a while. Go somewhere he can't find you. I've already set up a place, a small cabin about 50 miles out of town. No one knows about it. Stay there until the trial, until this whole thing blows over." Lay low? Hide away like some scared animal? Every fiber of my being rebelled against the idea. I was a soldier, damn it. I didn't run. I faced problems head-on. But I also knew Jake was right. I couldn't confront Vinny and his crew the same way I'd dealt with Nancy. This was a different kind of battlefield, one where violence and intimidation ruled. "All right," I muttered, feeling the fight drain out of me. "I'll go. But only until the trial starts. After that, I'm coming back, and I'm seeing this through." Jake nodded, relief flashing across his face. "Good. I'll make the arrangements. And George?" He paused, looking me dead in the eyes. "Keep your guard up. You've been through a lot, but the hardest part is still ahead. Retreat and regroup." 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of a small, rustic cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was far from the modern conveniences I'd grown used to, but it was safe. Isolated. Exactly what I needed. I didn't bother unpacking much. Just the basics, a few changes of clothes, some food, and a worn-out picture of my first wife, Linda. I hadn't thought of her in months, but now, standing there in that lonely cabin, I felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, Linda," I whispered, staring at her smiling face. "I don't know how I let things get this far." I set the picture down on the small nightstand and walked over to the window, staring out into the thick trees. My thoughts drifted back to Nancy, her face twisted in fury as they cuffed her wrists, the way she'd cursed and screamed. She was gone, but the threat she posed lingered like a ghost in the shadows. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the leaves outside made me jump. Paranoia crept in like a poison, whispering that Vinny was out there, watching, waiting. But the next morning came and went without incident. Then the day after that, and the day after that. I kept in touch with Jake through a burner phone he'd given me, checking in every few hours. He'd assured me that Vinny was lying low too, probably biding his time. By the end of the first week, I started to relax. Maybe, just maybe, things would settle down. Maybe I'd be able to walk back into that courtroom, see Nancy's face as they read out the charges, and know that it was over. But of course, life doesn't work that way. The unexpected visitor. It was the 8th day when it happened. I just finished chopping some firewood, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the clearing in front of the cabin. I was wiping the sweat from my brow when I heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. My heart leapt into my throat. Slowly, I reached for the hunting rifle I'd brought along, my fingers tightening around the barrel as I scanned the tree line. "George?" A voice called out, soft and hesitant. My grip on the rifle relaxed slightly. That voice, it wasn't Vinny. It wasn't any of his goons. It was Todd. I called back, taking a cautious step forward. And there he was, standing at the edge of the clearing, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. He looked even worse than he had during our last meeting. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his skin had a sickly pallor. But more than that, he looked scared. "Todd, what the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice rough with confusion and anger. "You shouldn't be here." He lowered his hands slowly, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out of the bushes. I didn't know where else to go, George," he stammered. I screwed up, man. I need your help." My heart sank. What now? What could possibly have gone wrong? "What do you mean you screwed up?" I asked warily, taking a step closer. "What happened?" Todd swallowed hard, his gaze darting around again. I went to see Nancy. At the jail." The words hit me like a slap. "You what?" I hissed, disbelief and anger crashing through me. "Why the hell would you go see her? After everything?" She sent me a letter," he interrupted, his voice trembling. "She said she had something important to tell me. That she wanted to apologize, to make things right." I shook my head, frustration bubbling up. How could he be so stupid? "Todd, she's manipulating you. She doesn't want to make anything right. She wants to drag you down with her." I know, he mumbled, rubbing a hand over his face. "But I went anyway. And she told me something, George. Something I think you need to know." A chill ran down my spine. What could she have possibly said that would drive him all the way out here? "What did she say, Todd?" I asked quietly, my eyes narrowing. He looked up, his face pale and haunted. "She said that Vinny's coming after you. He knows where you are, George. He's coming for you. And he's not coming alone." The world seemed to tilt under my feet. A sharp, metallic taste filled my mouth as I stared at Todd, the weight of his words pressing down like a vice around my chest. "How?" I breathed, barely able to speak. "How does he know where I am?" Todd looked away, shame and fear etched into every line of his face. "Because I told her." "I'm sorry, George. I didn't know. I didn't think she'd." But his words were lost in the rush of blood pounding in my ears. He'd told her. He'd led them straight to me. And now, they were coming. "Get inside," I snapped, shoving him toward the cabin. Now. My mind was racing. I'd let my guard down. I'd thought I was safe. And now, because of Todd's stupidity, because of Nancy's relentless grip, everything I'd worked to protect was about to come crashing down. But if Vinny and his crew thought I was going to roll over and die, they were in for one hell of a surprise. I'd survived worse than this. I wasn't going down without a fight. "Lock the doors. Close the blinds. Don't move until I say so," I ordered, the edge of command in my voice taking over as I shoved Todd into the cabin. "What are we going to do?" he stammered, his voice high and panicked. "Survive," I answered, my mind shifting into survival mode. The cabin wasn't built for defense, but it would have to do. Stay low and out of sight. I grabbed my phone, dialing Jake's number with trembling fingers. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm but tense. "George? What's going on?" "We've got a problem," I muttered, pacing the small living room. "Todd's here. He told Nancy where I was, and now Vinny's coming." Jake swore under his breath. "Damn it, George. All right, I'm on my way. I'll bring backup. But listen, you've got to hold them off until we get there. Can you do that?" "Yeah," I said grimly, staring out the window at the darkening woods. "I can do that. Because I didn't have a choice." This was it, the final stand. Vinny was coming, and he was bringing hell with him. But I was ready. This time, I'd be the one calling the shots. And when the dust settled, Nancy would finally understand the cost of crossing me. Because no matter what it took, no matter what I had to do, I was going to make sure that this nightmare ended right here, right now. The silence in the cabin was suffocating. Todd sat slumped on the couch, his hands shaking as he stared at the floor, too ashamed to meet my eyes. Outside, the woods were dark and still, but I knew better than to be fooled by the calm. I'd seen this kind of silence before. It was the silence before a storm. The kind that swallows everything whole. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. Panic wouldn't help us now. I needed to think like the soldier I used to be, like the strategist who could see a battlefield in his mind before a single shot was fired. "Listen to me, Todd," I said quietly, crouching down in front of him. His eyes flickered up, wide and scared. "We're not going to die here. Do you hear me? We're going to get through this." He nodded frantically, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I didn't mean to, I just thought." I grabbed his shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that we're prepared. Vinny's coming, and he's bringing his goons. But they don't know what they're walking into." I stood and crossed the room, opening the cabinet where I'd stored my gear. There wasn't much, a couple of rifles, a few boxes of ammo, and some basic survival equipment. Not exactly a fortress, but it would have to do. I tossed a rifle to Todd, who caught it with trembling hands. "You know how to use this?" I asked sharply. "Yeah, he fumbled with the gun, almost dropping it. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. I think so." "Good. Just remember to aim and breathe. Slow and steady," I instructed, keeping my voice level. "If things get bad, your job is to stay alive. Got it?" He nodded again, his face pale as he clutched the rifle to his chest like it was a lifeline. I moved around the cabin, closing the blinds and securing the windows. My mind was racing through possible scenarios, trying to anticipate Vinny's approach. He wouldn't come through the front door. Men like him preferred sneaking in the back, like rats scurrying through dark corners. Once I was satisfied with the defenses, I positioned myself by the front window, peering out through a small crack in the blinds. Nothing moved outside, no headlights, no sound of crunching gravel. Just that oppressive silence pressing down on me like a weight. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I quickly pulled it out. A message from Jake, ETA, 20 minutes. Hang tight. 20 minutes. It might as well have been 20 hours. A lot could happen in that time. "George," Todd's voice was barely a whisper. Do you think we'll make it?" I glanced over at him, seeing the fear etched into every line of his face. He was younger than me, by a good 20 years, but right now he looked like a terrified child. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But I couldn't lie. I wouldn't do that to him. "We're going to try, Todd," I said finally. "We're going to fight like hell. But if it comes down to it," I hesitated, then forced the words out. "If it comes down to it, you run. Don't look back. Just get the hell out of here." His eyes widened in panic. "No, I can't." "You can," I interrupted firmly. "And you will. There's no point in both of us going down." He swallowed hard, but before he could respond, a low rumble echoed through the woods. The sound of tires on gravel. I stiffened, every nerve in my body going on high alert. "Get down," I hissed, motioning for Todd to crouch behind the couch. He scrambled to obey, clutching the rifle tightly as I peered through the blinds again. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, slowly winding their way up the dirt road that led to the cabin. I counted 3 vehicles, big, dark SUVs. The kind used by people who didn't want to be seen. Vinny's here. The realization hit me like a cold splash of water. My fingers tightened around my rifle, the cool metal grounding me. There was no turning back now. I'd have to hold them off until Jake got here. If we could survive just a little longer, we might have a chance. Stay quiet, stay low, I whispered to Todd. Don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. He nodded shakily, his breath coming in soft, shallow gasps. The SUVs came to a stop a few yards from the cabin, their engines idling. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The doors remained shut, the headlights casting eerie shadows against the trees. Then, one by one, the doors swung open, and men stepped out. I counted 6 of them, all armed, their silhouettes dark and menacing against the blinding glare of the headlights. Vinny was the last to step out, his hulking figure unmistakable even from this distance. He stood at the front of the group, his gaze fixed on the cabin. "George," he bellowed, his voice carrying through the still night air. "I know you're in there, old man. Why don't you come out and we can talk?" I gritted my teeth, keeping my position by the window. Talk? Yeah, right. Men like Vinny didn't talk. They coerced, threatened, and destroyed. He was taunting me, trying to draw me out, to make me panic. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "I've got something to say to you, George," Vinny continued, his voice oozing false camaraderie. "You made a real mess of things, you know. Nancy's not too happy with you. She had big plans, and you went and screwed it all up." My grip on the rifle tightened. Nancy. Even from a jail cell, she was still pulling the strings. I should have known. I should have. The crack of gunfire shattered the silence, and I ducked instinctively as a bullet tore through the window, spraying glass across the floor. "Holy shit!" Todd yelped, his voice breaking as he scrambled to press himself flat against the ground. "Stay down." I barked, my heart pounding as more shots rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space of the cabin. Vinny's men had opened fire, bullets slamming into the walls and windows with brutal precision. I glanced around, trying to gauge our defenses. The front door was holding for now, but it wouldn't last long under this kind of assault. "George, you can't hide forever." Vinny shouted over the gunfire, his voice dripping with amusement. "Come out, and I promise I'll make this quick." Quick. Right. I knew exactly what his promises were worth. If we stepped outside, we'd be dead in seconds. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then I leaned around the edge of the window and fired a shot toward the nearest SUV. The sound of the rifle was a roar in my ears, the recoil slamming into my shoulder. A shout of pain echoed from outside, and one of Vinny's men dropped to the ground, clutching his leg. "Damn it, George!" Vinny growled. "You want to do this the hard way, huh?" He barked an order, and suddenly 2 of his men started advancing on the cabin, rifles raised. I fired again, but they scattered, using the trees and vehicles for cover. "Get ready," I muttered to Todd, who was shaking like a leaf beside me. "This is going to get ugly." I glanced at my phone, the screen lighting up with a new message from Jake, ETA, 10 minutes. Hold on. 10 minutes. I could do 10 minutes. Taking a deep breath, I steadied my aim and prepared for the fight of my life. I took another deep breath, feeling the familiar sense of battle readiness settle over me. It was almost like being back in the field again, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, sharpening my senses. I could almost smell the gunpowder and feel the sweat-soaked dirt beneath my boots. But this time, there was no platoon to back me up, just a terrified man and a shaky resolve. The bullets kept coming, slamming into the cabin walls and shattering more windows. Vinny's men were using suppressive fire to keep me pinned down. Smart move. They wanted me cornered and desperate. They wanted me to panic. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "Todd, get over here," I ordered, keeping my voice low and steady. "Move slowly, keep your head down." He crawled over, his face pale and slick with sweat. What do we do, George? We're gonna die here. They'll kill us." "Not if I have anything to say about it," I muttered, peeking through a small gap in the window blinds. I could see them positioning themselves, spreading out around the clearing to form a loose perimeter. They were cautious, not wanting to rush in too fast. Vinny knew I was dangerous, and he was using his men like pawns to flush me out. Stay close to the floor and follow my lead, I said, pressing the butt of my rifle against my shoulder. We need to hold them off until Jake gets here. Focus on staying alive, and don't waste any shots. Todd nodded frantically, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the safety on his rifle. I glanced at him, my jaw tightening. He was scared out of his mind, but I needed him to pull it together. Hey, I whispered sharply. Look at me. He glanced up, his eyes wide and frantic. You can do this, I said, my voice firm. Just breathe, aim, and pull the trigger. Remember, they're trying to kill us. It's us or them. He swallowed hard and nodded again, his grip on the rifle steadying. Okay. Okay, I'll try. I gave him a quick nod, then turned back to the window. I spotted two men moving closer, crouching low as they advanced from the left side of the cabin. My finger tightened on the trigger, and I fired a shot. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, and I saw one of the men stumble, clutching his arm. Another burst of gunfire erupted from the right, and I ducked as bullets sprayed through the window. Todd yelped, dropping flat to the floor as a chunk of the wooden frame splintered above his head. Stay down. I shouted, crawling over to him. Keep your head low, Ann. A deafening crash echoed through the cabin as the front door shuddered violently. Someone was trying to break it down. I scrambled to my feet, aiming at the door just as it burst open, the hinges giving way with a splintering crack. A hulking figure stormed through the doorway, his rifle raised. I fired instinctively, the bullet hitting him square in the chest. He staggered back, blood blooming across his shirt as he fell to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. But there was no time to celebrate. Another man appeared in the doorway, and I barely managed to dive behind the couch as he fired a burst of shots into the cabin. Todd! I shouted, glancing over my shoulder. Get to the kitchen. Now! He scrambled to his feet, stumbling as he ran toward the back of the cabin. I fired another shot at the man in the doorway, forcing him to retreat. But then I heard a sound that sent a chill down my spine, the unmistakable click of a grenade pin being pulled. Shit! I cursed, diving to the side just as a small, metallic object rolled through the doorway. Grenade! I shouted, grabbing Todd by the arm and yanking him down behind the kitchen counter. We barely hit the floor before the grenade exploded with a deafening boom, the shockwave rattling the entire cabin. Splinters and shards of wood flew through the air, the blast sending a cloud of dust and debris billowing around us. For a moment, everything was chaos. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my head as I pushed myself up, coughing through the thick smoke. Todd? Todd, you okay? I called out, my voice hoarse. I am fine, he gasped, his face pale and streaked with dust. What the hell was that? Grenade, I muttered, wiping the sweat and grime from my forehead. They're trying to flush us out. I peeked over the edge of the counter, squinting through the haze. The front door was blown wide open, the frame shattered. One of Vinny's men lay crumpled on the ground, his body still. But there were more shadows moving outside, more figures advancing through the smoke. I gritted my teeth, glancing at my phone. 7 minutes. That was all we needed. Just 7 more minutes. All right, listen up, I said, turning to Todd. We can't stay here. They'll keep throwing grenades until this place is nothing but rubble. We need to fall back. But where? He stammered, his eyes wide with fear. There's a cellar in the back, I explained quickly. It's small, but it's reinforced. We can hold them off from there until Jake gets here. He nodded, his hands shaking as he tightened his grip on the rifle. Okay. Okay, let's go. I led the way, keeping low as we moved toward the back of the cabin. The gunfire outside intensified, bullets whizzing through the shattered windows and ripping through the walls. I fired a few shots to keep them at bay, then grabbed the handle of the cellar door and yanked it open. Get inside. I ordered, pushing Todd down the narrow staircase. He stumbled down, nearly falling as he hit the bottom. I followed quickly, slamming the door shut behind us. The cellar was cramped and dark, the air thick with dust and the scent of musty earth. But it was safe. At least for now. Stay here, I murmured, glancing around the small space. There was an old metal shelving unit along one wall, filled with rusty tools and cans of paint. I grabbed one of the shelves and dragged it in front of the door, creating a makeshift barricade. Todd collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. I can't believe this is happening," he muttered, his voice shaky. I thought we were going to be safe." "Nowhere's safe, not until this is over," I replied grimly. "But we've got a chance. Just hold on a little longer." I crouched by the door, rifle ready, my ears straining for any sound. The gunfire outside was fading, replaced by the heavy thud of footsteps. Vinny's men were moving in, preparing for the final assault. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension coil tighter and tighter in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. I'd come this far, I wasn't about to let them take me down now. "Jake," I whispered into my earpiece, my voice low and urgent. "Where the hell are you?" "Almost there, George," he replied, his voice tense. "Just a few more minutes. Can you hold them?" I glanced at Todd, his eyes wide and terrified. Then I looked back at the cellar door, my jaw set in determination. "Yeah," I said softly. "I can hold them." Because I had to. There was no other choice. The world spun around me, pain radiating through my ribs as I struggled to push myself up. Vinny loomed over me, his face contorted into a cruel smile. He took a step closer, his booted foot pressing down on my shoulder, pinning me to the floor. "Nice try, George," he sneered, his voice low and taunting. "But this is where it ends for you. Did you really think you could outsmart me?" Outsmart her? My vision blurred, but I could see Todd's horrified expression as he huddled in the corner of the cellar. The terror in his eyes was palpable, but there was something else there too, guilt. He knew he'd been the one to bring Vinny here, and he knew it could cost us both our lives. "Vinny," I rasped, my breath hitching with pain. "You're making a mistake. She's playing you, just like she played me." Vinny's smile twisted into a scowl, and he pressed down harder with his boot, making me wince. "Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." But I did. I knew Nancy better than he thought, and I knew how manipulative she could be. She'd turned Todd into a puppet, and now she was using Vinny too, pulling his strings even from behind bars. "She's using you," I gasped, my words strained. "You're just another pawn. When she's done with you, she'll toss you aside like garbage." Vinny's eyes flickered, just for a second. Doubt. It was there, hiding behind the rage. He glanced over at Todd, then back at me, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Don't listen to him," Todd suddenly shouted, scrambling to his feet. His voice shook, but there was a hint of desperation there, a plea for Vinny to listen. "He's trying to turn us against each other. Nancy said he'd do this, he'd try to divide us." "She's the one who divided us, Todd." I shot back, pushing against Vinny's weight. "Think about it. She's got you fighting each other, and she's sitting safe, watching everything unfold. She doesn't care who wins, she only cares about getting away clean." Vinny's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking back and forth between Todd and me. For a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him. I saw his grip on the rifle loosen, saw the anger in his eyes give way to something like uncertainty. But then he snarled, shaking his head. "No. No more lies, George. You've already screwed things up enough." He raised his rifle, aiming it directly at my chest. Time seemed to slow down, the muzzle of the gun looming larger and larger. This was it. I was out of options, out of time. But just as Vinny's finger tightened on the trigger, a sudden, ear-splitting crack echoed through the room. Vinny stumbled back, his expression one of shock and disbelief as he stared down at the blood blossoming on his shoulder. "What?" he gasped, his voice trailing off as he looked up. Behind him, standing in the doorway, was Jake. His gun was still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. His face was grim, his eyes hard as he stepped into the cellar, his gaze never leaving Vinny. "Drop it, Vinny," Jake growled, his voice as cold as ice. "Or the next one goes through your skull." Vinny's rifle slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. He staggered back, clutching his wounded shoulder as he glared at Jake with a mixture of fury and disbelief. You bastard," he spat, his voice a low growl. "You think this is over? You think?" "Shut up," Jake snapped, his gaze flicking to me. "George, you all right?" I nodded weakly, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little bruised." Jake stepped forward, keeping his gun trained on Vinny. I called for backup. "They'll be here any minute." Vinny's eyes narrowed, and he took a step back, his gaze darting around the cellar as if searching for an escape. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're the hero here, but you're not. Nancy, she's got plans. Bigger than you know. You're just—" "Save it," Jake cut him off. "I'm not interested in your sob story. You and your goons are going down for this, and Nancy's not getting out of it either." Vinny's mouth twisted into a sneer, but he didn't say anything else. He just glared at us, his gaze filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. Then he turned his attention to Todd, who stood frozen in the corner, his eyes wide and unblinking. "You," Vinny hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "You're a dead man, Todd. You hear me? Dead." Todd flinched, his face paling even further. I didn't mean." "Enough," I interrupted, pushing myself to my feet. Pain flared through my side, but I ignored it, glaring at Vinny. "You're done here, Vinny. The game's over. You can go back and tell Nancy that she lost." "I'm still standing." He stared at me, his gaze burning with fury. But then, slowly, a smile crept across his face. A smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe you're still standing, old man," he murmured, his voice soft and dangerous. "But Nancy? She's not finished. You think you've won, but you have no idea what she's capable of. You have no idea what's coming." My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was just another one of his mind games. Another attempt to throw me off balance. "Take him out of here," I said quietly to Jake, not taking my eyes off Vinny. "I don't want to hear another word from him." Jake nodded and stepped forward, grabbing Vinny by the arm and pulling him toward the doorway. But as they reached the stairs, Vinny glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto mine. "This isn't over, George," he whispered, his voice so low I almost didn't hear it. "It's only just beginning." And then he was gone, dragged up the stairs and out of the cellar. The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with tension. I turned to Todd, who was still standing there, trembling like a leaf in a storm. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading. "George, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't think she—" "Save it," I snapped, my voice harsh. "You brought this on yourself, Todd. You let her use you. And because of that, we almost died tonight." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he looked down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know. I know." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. The anger, the frustration, it wasn't going to help anyone now. What mattered was that we'd survived. Vinny was in custody, and Nancy's plans were unraveling. But even as I tried to convince myself that it was over, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vinny's words were more than just empty threats. That smile, that look in his eyes, it was as if he knew something I didn't. As if Nancy had one last trick up her sleeve. I clenched my fists, a cold determination settling in my chest. If she thought she could still win, she was dead wrong. I'd come this far. I wasn't about to let her destroy everything I'd fought to protect. "Jake," I called up the stairs, my voice steady. "We need to talk. There's more to this than we realized." Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, his face grim. "I know, George. Vinny's not just blowing smoke. Nancy's still got something planned." "Then we need to figure out what it is," I said firmly. "And we need to stop it before it's too late." Jake nodded slowly, his gaze hard. "Agreed. But first, we need to get you out of here. It's not safe." I glanced around the cellar, at the debris and bloodstains, and nodded reluctantly. "All right. Let's go." But even as we left the cabin, even as I climbed into Jake's car and felt the cool night air brush against my face, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't over. That somewhere, somehow, Nancy was still out there, plotting her next move. And I'd have to be ready for whatever came next.